Hey, what's up everybody? Michael from RogueDeckBuilder.com here, doing another Deck Tech Doctor episode. This deck is brought to us by Casey Iseman on YouTube. Thank you for sending in your deck. This is his very first deck, and it is a Gruul aggro deck. And so how I want these Deck Tech Doctor episodes to work now is, I think because, I noticed my last few of episodes have been quite long, especially since I started taking the method of, going on to gatherer.com, finding a whole bunch of suggestions, and then going through those suggestions. I think what I'm going to do now for newer players, for newer deck builders such as Casey, is I'm going to keep it a little bit shorter, because a lot of the problems are generally more structural and more just foundational things you need to learn. So I'm going to direct them to my how to get into deck building series. It's in my video list. You can go check them out if you haven't already. Casey, it's a 2-part episode. They're about 20-30 minutes each, and it'll go through all the foundational things you need to just start building decks in the right way, because they are structured. There is a certain way that decks should be built, and deviating from that is just going to make your deck weaker overall. And I know you sometimes don't have access to the right cards and everything like that, but I think what people should get more into the habit of is using Tapped Out as a place to sort of prototype a deck, have it all ready to go on paper, and then just proxy it and use that to test, rather than just trying to find out what you can make with the collection you have. Nothing's wrong with looking through your collection and finding the right cards and stuff like that, but you want to be able to have the right amount of cards, and sometimes, proxies are the way to go if you actually want to test a deck out, because it's hard to test a deck out when you have an idea but you just don't have the cards for it, because it won't give a good representation of the deck. So that is what I would suggest. And so what I'm going to be doing from now on, if it's someone's first deck, or they're just completely new to Magic or deck building in general, I'm just going to recommend they look at my video series. Everyone who's watched it has put some good feedback on it, and I think a lot of people have been helped by it, which is pretty awesome. And so I'm going to recommend them just go watch those videos, and then I'll go through their deck still, but I'll just touch on some of the points that I'll summarize some of the points I go over in my videos, as well as I will give a example of a top tier deck in the same vein of things. For example, Gruul aggro is similar to green red monsters. I mean, there's some staples in here. You have Xenagos, the Reveler, stuff like that. Elvish Mystics. So I'll go through an example, and it'll give you a better visual representation of the way it's structured and things like that, and it might help your own deck building. So let's get on with things. So first off, you want to have a solid goal. Right now, Casey, you have you don't really have a goal yet. From what I can see, and it also does help people who are going to view your deck on tappedout.net, if you actually put in the description what your goal is, because every deck should have a goal. Every deck should do something, and every card in that deck should be relevant to what you're trying to do, whether it be aiming for a certain combo, protecting that combo, the way the deck plays out, in the style of the deck. Do you play at a lot of threats? Do you burn your opponent? Do you control the battlefield and then play your own big threat and just kill them in a couple turns? Those are types of things you need to think about when you're building a deck, and then from there you can get a little bit more specific once you're going through and picking out certain cards. A couple of these examples, for Gruul aggro. So the description of an aggro deck is pretty straightforward. Play a lot of threats, get your opponent down from 20 to 0 as fast as possible. In the case of Gruul aggro decks such as this, it's more of a, play monsters. Those are going to be your threats rather than burn, and you're going to be just playing down threat after threat. Your opponent can't handle them. You wipe them out, in a few turns. That's generally what you're wanting to do, and especially with cards such as Elvish Mystic, you're going to be ramping into your larger threats and being able to just, turn 1, 2, 3, prepare your board just really, really well. Turn 4 or 5, possibly 6, just swing out and kill them. That's the basic game plan. Of course, you're interacting with your opponent. There's other things to think about, but that's pretty much the game plan that you're going to have with a Gruul aggro deck. So, for example, Fog, for instance. This is a good example of a deck you don't want to have in this type of deck. Reason being is it's what I call a reactive card. You know, fog is a reactive card. You don't play it unless your opponent does something. Really, like there's no reason why you're going to do it. You're going to play it because your goal is in an aggro deck to get your opponent from 20 to 0 as fast as possible. If you're preventing combat damage, that's not going to help. You're generally not going to care about your life total. In the start, when you first start Magic, your life total is going to seem very, very precious to you. This is something that every single Magic player goes through when they first start. They look at all these cards and they think, man, I need to protect myself from this. I need to protect myself from that. So they start throwing in a lot of these reactive cards, and it ends up weakening their deck just a whole bunch. For example, you're only playing 15 creatures, which is only 15 threats. That's not that many. You want at least close to half of your deck just to be full of threats. And cards such as Fog take up that space. And because you want to be playing out threats every single turn, or close to every single turn, drawing a Fog is essentially going to be a dead draw. Because if you're in the driver's seat, if you're playing your threats out when you on time and stuff like that, you're going to be winning. And Fog is just going to hamper that. When Fog could be a monster or something like that, that would be a lot better. And so those are a lot of reactive cards. And in an aggro deck, you want proactive cards. You want lightning strikes. You want haste creatures. You want just big creatures in general. You want cards like Stormbreath Dragon that are hard to deal with. Those are the types of cards you want in a monsters deck, and you want a lot of those types of cards because generally your threats are going to be large enough that you don't have to worry about, removing your opponent's creatures or protecting your own creatures because your creatures are going to be big enough that you can just pretty much stomp over them. That's generally what these monster decks are planning to do. And you do, of course, include some utility. I mean, every deck needs a little bit of utility, but cards such as Fog and stuff like that aren't going to go towards your goal, and neither is stuff like Naturalize. In regards to Naturalize, these are cards that are more sideboard cards. Now, when you build a deck, it doesn't matter so much if you're starting out or if you're playing more casually. But you're usually looking to build a 75 card deck. Now that means that you build a 60 card deck plus 15 cards in mind for your sideboard. Now, if you don't know what a sideboard is 15 cards that are set to the side. They aren't in your main board, which is just your main 60 card deck. And in between games in a match, you're allowed to take out cards from your main board and then take cards from your sideboard and put them in place of those cards in the main board. So Naturalize is an example of a sideboard card, because usually in main boards you don't even know if they're going to play enchantments or artifacts. So if you keep it in your main board and you happen to draw it, first game, and they have no artifacts or enchantments, that card does absolutely nothing. So you want to keep those in the sideboard, and if in game one you see, they're playing a lot of enchantments and a lot of artifacts, well, if you lose that game, or even if you win that game, you'll take Naturalize out of your sideboard and you'll replace it with something in your main board. So that is generally what these cards are like. And in a Gruul aggro deck as well, you'll usually have something like Unravel the Aether from Born of the Gods. It's a little bit better than Naturalize in my opinion because of the gods. It gets rid of gods, whereas Naturalize doesn't because they're indestructible. All right. I'm not going to be going into too much. Again, I want to reiterate that I don't want to make this too long. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about anyways is going to be gone into more detail in my videos. So, I mean, if you haven't already watched my Deck Building 101 episodes, KC, I highly recommend you watching it, as well as anyone else who's new to deck building. Definitely go check those out. It's a 2-part series. It's in my video listings, and I'm sure it will help you immensely. So rather than go through all the cards, the one last thing I'm going to touch on before showing you an example is the land. So the land, when you're ever playing a dual-colored deck or more, possibly a tri-colored deck, land is extremely important, especially in an aggro deck. I would say it's most important in an aggro deck almost, because you want to be pretty fast with your deck and you want to be able to play out things on time. So, for example, Gruul Guildgate comes in tapped. You mentioned that this is, you have a low budget and a medium budget for cards. And and I'm assuming you just made this deck out of the cards you have. That's not a problem, but you want to start thinking of building a deck on tappedout.net and then proxying it so you can test it and then get the cards. It'll help save you money in the long run, and it'll still help you able to test the deck. I will do a proxy episode just for people who don't know how to proxy cards. It's very, very simple, but it'll just be a place where I'm able to direct people to go rather than just keep telling them in the video, because that'll be a little bit annoying if I have to do that all the time. So, but land is usually the first thing I get, and for a deck. And the nice thing about land is you generally only need to get it once, because land can work in a variety of decks. So that is generally why you get it first. Now they have both what are called Scrylands and Shocklands out right now. They have green-red Scrylands, which are the Temple of Abandons, and then they have the green-red Shocklands, which are Stomping Grounds. Now, Stomping Grounds, you pay 2 life, and it comes in untapped. Otherwise, it just comes in tapped, and it's a green-red dual land. The life loss is irrelevant. Being able to play things out on time and having access to both colors, you'll know why it's quite important when you actually start playing with it. But you can always, because you're on a lower budget, just getting even just the Scrylands are going to help your deck a lot. Getting 4 of them, you'll want 4 guild gates as well, and then that'll give you access to 8 dual lands. And then from there, you can save up for the Shocklands and then replace the guild gates with Shocklands. And then you'll end up with 4 Scrylands and 4 Shocklands, which is essentially always going to happen if you're going to be, or what you'll always want to aim for when you're building a dual-colored deck. All right, that's pretty much the last thing I have to say about that. Because, there's a lot of cards in here that they don't really fit in the deck, which is why I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking through all the cards. I'm going to shift over to an example. So this is mtgtop8.com. This is a website I actually highly recommend for people who want to look at examples. You can look at through formats as well as every single type of deck. For example, on the right side you can see Gruul monsters, so we'll go to that. And there's just a whole bunch of examples of decks that people have made with Gruul monsters and what event they participated in, as well as what rank they got and when they actually played. So we'll go to a Grand Prix. No, actually, we'll do one that got number 1 on an MTGO Premier. So we'll put these side by side. It'll help a little bit in explaining things. So Casey, the first thing you're going to notice is the land. Like I mentioned, he's playing 4 Temple of Abandons and 4 Stomping Grounds. That's generally what you're going to play. That's all I'll say about that. Now, the one thing you'll also notice is he's playing 27 creatures. You're playing 15. Because the green-red monsters deck wants to be the beatdown deck, they want to just have a deck full of threats. They really don't care too much about utility. However, they still play threats that actually still do an additional effect usually. So you'll notice that there's a lot of 4-ofs as well. I'll go over why that is in my deck building 101 series. But to just keep it short, generally, the higher count of cards you have, the more likely you're going to draw them. It's just simple math. So 4 Sylvan Caryatids, 4 Stormbreath Dragons, for Polukranos World Eater. He's playing a lot of forests because he wants to draw those very frequently, and they help get him towards his goal. For example, 4 Elvish Mystics helps him have a higher chance of drawing them in his opening hand when they're the most effective. So he can go turn 1 Elvish Mystic that gives him access to 3 mana on turn 2, which allows him to play Domri, which again he has 4 of because he wants it in the early turns. It helps give him card advantage. It helps him keep the board clean because he can fight creatures together. Or, he can fight his larger creatures to his opponent's smaller creature and clear the way. It's a whole bunch of cards, and you play a lot of these high impact cards. And so let's see what else. Of course, a Krufix. I could go on and on about all these cards specifically, but I just wanted to go more over I just wanted to use the example just to give you a better visual representation of the structure of the deck. So for example, you have 1 Primeval Bounty, 2 Verdant Havens. You have 4 1-ofs of artifacts that they don't really do anything. For example, like Fleet Feather Sandals. You're spending 4 mana to give a creature flying and haste. Yeah, but essentially, in that place, just for the extra mana, you could have something like a Stormbreath Dragon, which is a 4/4 flying haste, but it has many more additional effects that are a little bit more prevalent than something like Fleet Feather Sandals. As well as because the Green-Red Monsters deck wants to just keep playing threats out, they want to have a lot of cards that can stand on their own. Now, what that means is, there are just objectively good cards out there. Stormbreath Dragon is a perfect example of one. By itself, it's a 4/4 flying haste protection from white. It has monstrosity, and the monstrosity effect can be very, very strong. It doesn't need any other cards to actually be useful. So that's why these Green-Red Monsters decks just want a whole bunch of these types of cards. Same with Pelucranos. Even at its worst, Pelucranos is still a 5/5 for 4 mana, which is essentially very good value. But the additional effect is it can potentially board wipe a weenie deck or something like that, as well as you can fight creatures, and it's just overall a very good card. You're playing a lot of cards that sometimes rely on other cards to be useful. For example, Woodborn Behemoth. Sure, it can essentially be an 8/8 with trample, but it requires you to have 8 or more lands, which when you play it out, you're probably only going to have minimum of 5 lands, actually. So you're going to need to pull 3 more lands to actually get an effect out of it, which is 3 more turns, which is a lot of turns. 3 more draws or even 2 more draws is essentially a lot for your opponent to actually come back from the game. For example, Ogre Battle Driver is another example of requiring other cards to actually be useful. Because you're not playing a lot of utility cards in these Green-Red Monsters decks, they need the card advantage, so that's why they play cards like Domri and Course of Kruphix, because those cards help gain card advantage. They help go through your deck a little bit faster so you can keep drawing threats. Because they know they're not playing a lot of utility type stuff, like Fog or, like Ranger's Guile or cards to protect their threats from other cards, they generally don't care about that. They just want to keep putting out threats and overrun their opponent. And that's why they fill their deck up with a whole bunch of just really effective threats that don't have to rely on other cards. Because if in the off chance they get Supreme Verdict or something, turn 4, turn 5 they could top deck a Stormbreath Dragon off the top, and that could win them the game, essentially, honestly, because that's protection from white against the blue-white control decks. Whereas, if you got Verdict and you top decked a Ogre Battle Driver or something like that, it's not going to do as much because it requires other cards to be effective. So, that is the only utility hit cards they generally have are, of course, in the sideboard and just in the main board with a few Mizium Mortars. And so this gives you a good example of the structure of a Green-Red Monsters deck, and essentially will help you build towards a goal. Now, I'm not saying you have to just copy this deck, but this is one of the top tier decks essentially right now. Tier 1 easily, and it's winning a lot of tournaments, getting a lot more prominence in tournaments, but it'll help, I'm not saying copy it. You don't have to copy it. I mean, you can copy it if you want to, but it'll at least give you a good representation of what you should be aiming for and, the structure of the deck. That's the most important thing, I think, when you start learning to build a deck. Getting down the structure and why people play, 4 cards of this, 3 cards of that, why they play this card over that card, it'll give you a better idea of how to build your own deck, and then you can implement that into other decks. And just knowing those skills is the most important thing, which is why I made that deck building episode. Those deck building 101 episodes is because having those skills transfers to every single other deck you're going to build, which is extremely important. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. You feel free to just leave this screen up to just keep studying it and figure out the little nuances. And again, do your research. I mean, go on YouTube, look at some of these Green-Red Monsters decks in action, figure out how they work, and it'll help you in your own deck and your own playing as well. But that's all I have to say about that. Coming up to 20 minutes, I don't really want to go past that. Thank you, Casey Iceman, for sending in your deck. Again, as usual, guys, to whoever's watching, feel free to leave comments in the comment section below, and I'm sure Casey will read them if you have any suggestions for him. As well as keep sending in your guys' deck. Always love receiving decks, and I will keep putting out these episodes. But thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.